A storm was brewing, not just outside my window in the heart of Rome, but within the very foundations of my life's work. My name is Marco, and at 45, I had poured a lifetime into Vesuvio manufacturing. For 17 years, I'd been the digital architect, transforming a company still reliant on paper ledgers into a modern titan. You wouldn't find my name prominently displayed in their sleek annual reports, nor would you see my face plastered across their corporate website. But every blinking server light, every seamless data transfer, every secure line of code humming beneath Vesuvio's sprawling operations in Naples, that was my handiwork. I took the job as a temporary escape, a way to mend the jagged edges of a life upended by divorce. After Isabella left, taking with her the future we'd meticulously planned, I needed something to absorb me, something concrete to build when my personal world had crumbled. Vesuvio, with its ancient, crumbling infrastructure, presented a monumental challenge, and I, a man with nothing left to lose, embraced it. I was good at it, remarkably so, and somewhere between late-night coding sessions and troubleshooting unexpected network failures, those cold, gleaming machines became an extension of myself, my digital children. The summons for lunch came from Massimo Rossi, Vesuvio's CEO. It was to be at Il Giardino Segreto, a place whispered about in hushed tones, reserved for the city's elite and the most coveted clients. It was the kind of establishment where million-euro deals were quietly sealed, not where careers were unceremoniously ended. Massimo, however, was always one for dramatic flair. "Marco, you've been invaluable," he began, meticulously carving into a glistening piece of ossobuco. The word hung in the air, a thinly veiled prelude to the inevitable. But we need fresh perspectives, someone with a vision for where technology is heading. My fork paused mid-air, the rich aroma of saffron and red wine suddenly losing its allure. Translation: we found someone cheaper, someone who won't challenge the board's ill-conceived whims. Gianni Vitel, Massimo continued, oblivious to the silent storm brewing within me. Our owner's nephew, just returned from a prestigious program in Silicon Valley. Brilliant mind, specialized in digital transformation. I nodded, a polite, almost imperceptible dip of my head, and took a slow sip of water. The ice clinked against the crystal, a tiny, fragile sound in the opulent room. "Who will be handling the transition?" My voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning beneath. Massimo seemed to deflate slightly, clearly relieved I wasn't staging a scene. "You'll have 6 weeks. We'll make the official announcement after the quarterly all-hands meeting." Before the espresso arrived, a crisp non-disclosure agreement was placed before me. I signed it, my signature a practiced flourish, and offered Massimo a firm handshake, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. I understood, I told him. Business decisions had to be made. Back at my desk, the glow of the monitors a familiar comfort. I noticed the subtle, insidious changes. My administrator credentials, once absolute, had been downgraded. My name, a constant presence on the leadership team's email chain for over a decade, was conspicuously absent. They'd decided before lunch, I realized perhaps weeks ago. That night, sleep was a distant shore. Not because of anger, though a potent brew of it simmered within me. Not from fear of an uncertain future, for I had faced uncertainty before and emerged stronger. No, it was because of a nagging detail, a whisper in the digital shadows I'd noticed 3 months prior. Small, unauthorized access attempts in the server logs. An IP address I'd traced, unsettlingly, to the executive floor. Someone had been poking around in systems they shouldn't have even known existed. They'd been studying my documentation, dissecting my security protocols, scrutinizing my contingency plans. They weren't just replacing me. They were mining me for everything I knew. 16 years ago, I had moved to Rome, following Isabella after our wedding. I'd left a promising security job in Milan because she'd been accepted into a prestigious graduate program here. We were young, ambitious, full of the kind of naive optimism that only youth can afford. I figured I'd find something. The divorce, when it came 7 years later, was a silent earthquake. One day, a life meticulously constructed. The next, papers on the kitchen counter. "We want different things," she'd said. "No fights, no warnings, just a quiet, devastating finality." When Vesuvio Manufacturing hired me, I was sleeping on my brother's couch, the scent of his stale coffee a constant companion. They needed someone, anyone, to patch together their failing network infrastructure after a debilitating ransomware attack. My tenure was meant to be temporary, a stopgap, a way to pay the bills. But I saw potential, a vast, untapped digital frontier. These manufacturing giants understood machines, the roar of the factory floor, the precision of their assembly lines. But computers, they were an alien language, a necessary evil, their entire operation millions in equipment, hundreds of jobs teetering on outdated systems, one catastrophic crash away from disaster. I pitched Massimo a 5-year overhaul plan. He, surprisingly, gave me the budget and, more importantly, the autonomy to work. For 3 years, I barely saw daylight. I rebuilt every network from the ground up, trained staff, created intricate backup and fail-safe systems. When a massive power outage swept across the region, Vesuvio was the only facility that remained online, a silent testament to my foresight and tireless efforts. The board, those staid, traditional men in their impeccably tailored suits, noticed. Massimo began bringing me to meetings, introducing me with a newfound respect. My budget tripled. I hired a team, good people, loyal people, like Sofia, who became my trusted second-in-command, and Luca, a coding prodigy who could untangle any digital knot. We weren't just it anymore. We were the nervous system of Vesuvio, the silent guarantee that promises would be kept, deadlines met. Lorenzo Marchetti, the majority owner, a man whose presence filled any room, shook my hand at the company's Christmas party in 2020. "You've transformed us into a modern operation, Marco," he boomed, his voice echoing through the opulent ballroom. "We couldn't have expanded without your systems. I thought I had found my place, a corner of the world where I truly mattered." The first crack appeared last September. A consultant, a slick-haired man with an overly confident smile, showed up unannounced to audit our digital infrastructure. He asked rudimentary questions about systems I had personally designed, their intricacies beyond his superficial grasp. When I pressed him on who authorized the audit, he stammered something about the executive team and quickly changed the subject. Then my access to board meeting minutes, once a given, vanished from the shared drive. "Server cleanup," the automated explanation read. In December, Massimo began canceling our weekly briefings, always with a plausible, yet increasingly flimsy, excuse. At the New Year leadership retreat, I overheard Lorenzo talking about his nephew graduating. Brilliant with computers, he'd boasted. Silicon Valley companies fighting over him. I didn't think much of it then. I should have. The final, undeniable sign came when Sofia told me about a meeting she'd been invited to, a strategic planning session that, by all rights, I should have led. When she mentioned my name, Massimo had smoothly changed the subject. "Something felt off," she'd confessed, "like they were planning around you." I brushed it off. Loyal to a fault, my ex used to say. 2 days after that fateful lunch, I stood in the server room at 7 p.m., long after the last employee had departed. The quiet hum of the machinery, a symphony of efficiency, had always soothed me. These towering racks of servers, the blinking lights, the precision cooling systems I had selected every component, designed every redundancy. This was my sanctuary, my kingdom. I ran my hand along the cool metal edge of the main console, 17 years of my life, hidden behind these walls, forged in late nights and early mornings. I turned to find Alessio Bianchi, Gianni Vitel's associate, standing in the doorway, clean-cut, an expensive watch glinting on his wrist, radiating a casual, almost arrogant, confidence. He couldn't have been more than 30. "Just routine checks," I said, my voice deliberately neutral. "Need something." "Getting the lay of the land," he replied, walking in as if he already owned the place, his movements fluid and possessive. Massimo mentioned you'd be showing me around soon. Did he? My eyebrows arched ever so slightly. Alessio studied the intricate server configuration, his gaze sweeping over my meticulously organized kingdom. Impressive setup, a bit old school, but solid. Old school, I'd upgraded these systems just 8 months ago, investing countless hours, pushing the boundaries of efficiency. Your documentation is thorough, he continued, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Been reading through your protocols. I have some ideas for modernization. He said it like he was doing me a favor, bestowing his enlightened wisdom upon a lesser mortal. Looking forward to hearing them, I managed, the words tasting like chalk in my mouth. After he left, the silence in the server room felt heavier, charged with an unspoken threat. I sat down at my workstation and opened the access logs. Alessio's credentials had been created 3 weeks before my lunch with Massimo. He'd already been granted top-level administrator access. He had already viewed my entire documentation library, every secret, every innovation laid bare. I pulled out my phone and texted Luca. Can you meet tomorrow before work? Coffee at Caf Roma, 6:30 a.m. That night, I drove to the ancient Roman aqueducts, parking where Isabella and I used to watch the city lights flicker to life. The sky, vast and Inkai, mirrored the darkness in my soul. I thought about the day Massimo had promoted me to director. You're the backbone of this place, he declared, his hand clasped firmly on my shoulder. We couldn't run without you. Turns out, backbones are replaceable too. Luca was already at Caf Roma when I arrived the next morning, dark circles under his eyes. He knew something was wrong. They're phasing me out, I said, without preamble, the words flat and devoid of emotion. He nodded slowly, a shared understanding passing between us. I figured they've been asking weird questions, having me explain your systems for a couple weeks now. He looked down at his coffee, stirring it idly. I'm sorry, Marco. I should have told you. I didn't blame him. Luca had a family, a mortgage, a life that depended on this job. What's your plan? He asked, his voice low. I hadn't realized I had one until he asked. But sitting there, watching the early morning commuters hustle past the window, a quiet resolve settled within me, a clarity I hadn't felt since the day I found Isabella's divorce papers. They think everything's in the documentation, I said quietly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. But we both know it's not. Luca leaned forward, his eyes bright with understanding. The proprietary tools, the workarounds. I nodded. The patches I built that aren't in any manual, the custom monitoring system, the client interface no one else fully understands. Marco, I'm not going to sabotage anything, Luca began, his brow furrowed with concern. I know, I interrupted gently, but I'm not going to give away what's mine either. Luca studied me for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. He understood. I need copies of everything I developed personally, I said, and I need to know who's still loyal. The official announcement came during the all-hands meeting the following week. Massimo, standing at the podium, a forced smile plastered across his face, spoke of exciting transitions and fresh perspectives. Alessio, beside him, smiled politely at the appropriate moments, a picture of corporate charm. Marco has been instrumental in building our infrastructure, Massimo said, not looking at me, his gaze fixed somewhere over my head. And we're grateful for his contributions as he helps us transition to Alessio's leadership over the next 6 weeks. Murmurs rippled through the room. Most of the IT team looked shocked, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Sophia's eyes found mine across the room, a silent question hanging in the air. I gave her the smallest of nods, a subtle assurance. After the meeting, I requested a sit-down with Massimo and Silvia Morti from HR. I pointed out that several of the systems Alessio would be taking over were built by me outside normal work hours, using my own development framework. The employment contract is clear, Silvia said, Her voice clipped, sliding a document across the table. Anything developed during your tenure is company property. Not everything, I countered calmly. The system sync interface, for example, was developed before I joined Vesuvio. I licensed it to the company but retained ownership. It's right there in the original agreement. Massimo shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That was 17 years ago. Marco, the company has evolved. So has System Sync, I replied, my voice steady, unwavering. Every update, every integration was built on my original code. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just want proper compensation for my intellectual property. Massimo and Sylvia exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. We'll look into it, Massimo said finally, his tone dismissive. In the meantime, please focus on the transition with Alessio. I knew that look. They were stalling. The next morning, my access to the development servers was restricted. Security protocol during transition periods, read the automated email, a chillingly impersonal message. Alessio called a team meeting without inviting me. When I showed up anyway, he seemed annoyed, but covered it quickly. Marco, glad you could join us, he said, a forced pleasantness in his voice. I was just outlining some changes to the network architecture. I leaned against the door frame, a silent observer. Interesting. Which architecture specifically? The main production floor systems, he said confidently, a smug smile playing on his lips. We're going to streamline the protocols. Those protocols prevent machine failures under peak load, I said evenly, my voice calm, almost educational. They're custom designed for our equipment. Alessio's smile tightened, his composure faltering for a fraction of a second. Modern systems don't require such complex workarounds. They're not workarounds, Sophia interjected, her voice firm, resolute. They're necessary adaptations for our specific hardware. Marco designed them after the 2018 failure. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Alessio's confidence wavered for a moment. Then he recovered. Well, I appreciate the historical perspective, but we're moving forward with the streamlining. He turned to the whiteboard, effectively dismissing me. Later that day, I received an email from legal. The company was asserting full ownership of all systems, including System Sync, citing a clause about integrated technologies becoming company property. They offered me a technology acquisition bonus of 5,000 euros. The real betrayal came the next day. I discovered Alessio had scheduled one-on-one meetings with each of my team members. Not transition discussions, I realized with a jolt, but full job evaluations. He was assessing who to keep, who to discard. Luca texted me afterward. He asked if your systems were really necessary or just overcomplicated, Luca wrote, fishing for criticism. That night, I found an email from one of our suppliers in my personal account. They were confused about a new licensing agreement Vesuvio had sent over one I knew nothing about. I pulled up the document. Massimo had signed a deal transferring all my custom supplier integrations to a third-party vendor, Alessio's former classmate's startup. They weren't just pushing me out. They were dismantling everything I'd built and selling it off, piece by painstaking piece. When I tried to access the backup servers to retrieve my original code, I found my credentials revoked entirely. Game on. I needed leverage, and I needed it fast. Vesuvio hadn't just been careless. They'd been calculating, meticulously planning. The timeline was becoming chillingly clear. Alessio had been brought in months ago, studying my systems, preparing to replace me while extracting every ounce of my knowledge. That night, I reached out to Matteo Rixai, a network security specialist I'd worked with years ago. We met at a nondescript trattoria off the highway, the kind of place executives like Massimo would never set foot in. Legally, you're in a tough spot, Matteo said after I explained the situation, the steam from his pasta a comforting mist around us. But there's something that doesn't add up. Why push you out now? The company's doing well. That's what I can't figure out, I admitted, swirling the last of my wine. Let me dig around, he offered, a glint in his eye. Just information gathering, nothing intrusive. 2 days later, Matteo called me at 11 p.m. His voice was urgent. Hushed. You need to see this. He'd found SEC filings showing Vesuvio was preparing for acquisition. Astra Industries, a sprawling manufacturing conglomerate from Turin, was in late-stage talks to buy them out. The deal was contingent on Vesuvio demonstrating modernized technical infrastructure and transitional leadership. They're cleaning house to make the sale look better, Matteo explained, his voice crackling with urgency. And your systems are a major selling point. The valuation specifically mentions the proprietary manufacturing management interface. My interface. System sync. There's more, Matteo continued. Lorenzo Marchetti cashed out most of his shares last quarter. The acquisition would mainly benefit Massimo and the executive team. They get golden parachutes and executive positions at Astra. The piece that broke me wasn't the acquisition. It was finding emails showing Massimo and Lorenzo had discussed replacing me over 6 months ago, while I was pulling all-nighters to fix a major security breach. They were interviewing Alessio. I drove to the old industrial park where I'd first sketched the system sync architecture, back when it was just an idea, a nascent spark. I sat in my car until dawn, watching the sky turn gray over the abandoned warehouses, a fitting backdrop to my shattered illusions. When I got home, I found an old external hard drive in my closet. I plugged it in and found what I was looking for, the original system sync code, pre-Vesuvio. The documentation showing I'd started development 8 months before joining the company. I also found the emails, Massimo specifically requesting I integrate systems sync with Vesuvio systems. His acknowledgement that it was my proprietary tool. His promise that we'd formalize ownership once things settled down. I'd trusted him. Fool me. The next day, Alessio called me into a meeting with Massimo and Silvia from HR. We're accelerating the transition, Massimo said without preamble, his gaze unwavering. Your last day will be next Friday. 2 weeks instead of 6, I noted, my voice calm, almost detached. Any particular reason? Alessio has demonstrated exceptional capability, Silvia said smoothly, a practiced smile on her lips. And frankly, Marco, your attitude hasn't been conducive to a smooth handover. I nodded slowly, absorbing her words, the insult washing over me without touching. I see. We'll need you to complete all documentation and training by Wednesday, Alessio added, his tone bordering on condescending. Of course, I replied, my voice steady. And the ownership of System Sync? Have you had time to review the original agreements? Massimo's expression hardened, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. Our legal team has determined that all integrated systems fall under company ownership. The separation package is generous. Marco, I suggest you take it. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a soft scrape against the polished floor. I'll have my lawyer review everything. Don't make this difficult, Massimo warned, his voice a low growl. It won't change the outcome. As I walked out, I texted Luca. Plan B, tonight. 7 hours later, Luca handed me a flash drive in the dimly lit parking lot of a grocery store. Everything you asked for, he said quietly, his breath misting in the cool night air. Original code bases, deployment logs, authentication keys. Crazy, Luca, I said, a genuine gratitude in my voice. Why are you helping me? He looked me in the eye, his expression resolute. Because they think we're all replaceable, Marco, and they're wrong. I spent the weekend meticulously documenting everything, the original system sync code, the emails with Massimo, the licensing agreements, the irrefutable dates proving I'd developed the core technology before joining Vesuvio. Monday morning, I arrived early, finding Sophia already at her desk, a weary slump to her shoulders. You heard about the accelerated timeline? She asked. Her voice hushed. I nodded. How's the team taking it? Not well, she sighed. Alessio called emergency planning sessions all weekend. Tried to reverse engineer your monitoring system. She lowered her voice further. It didn't go well. 3 alerts from the production floor got missed. Anyone hurt? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. No, thankfully. But they had to shut down line 3 for 4 hours. Cost about 40,000 euros in lost production. I kept my expression neutral, a mask of feigned sympathy. Sorry to hear that. Sophia hesitated, her gaze searching mine. I think I'm next. Alessio's been asking if my role is really necessary. I'd suspected as much. Sophia knew too much about how things really worked. Do you trust me, Sophia? I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't hesitate. Completely. I slid a sealed envelope across her desk. If anything happens this week, anything unusual, open this. It explains everything. That afternoon, I met with 3 separate patent attorneys, paying exorbitant rush fees to file provisional patents on key aspects of System Sync. Not the whole system, just the critical components that made it uniquely effective with manufacturing equipment. On Tuesday, I completed all the transition documentation Alessio requested, attended his planning meeting, answered his questions politely. The model employee. Meanwhile, Matteo was helping me set up a secure server offsite. By midnight, I had transferred all my original code there, creating a standalone version of System Sync that would run independently of Vesuvio's infrastructure. Wednesday morning, I found an email from Astra Industries in my personal account, an invitation to discuss mutual business interests at their regional office. They'd heard I was leaving Vesuvio and were interested in my expertise. Someone, it seemed, was hedging their bets. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, then made a call to Astra's VP of Operations, suggesting we meet after my official departure from Vesuvio. He agreed immediately. That night, I executed the key part of my plan. Using the access credentials Luca had saved, I updated 3 critical components of System Sync. I added digital signature verification that would check if the code had been modified by unauthorized parties. I updated the license to expire in exactly 8 days the day after my official departure. I created a clean, legal transition path. The system would continue functioning if a proper licensing agreement was signed. Nothing destructive, nothing malicious, just protecting what was rightfully mine. On Thursday, Alessio pulled me into his office, a suspicious glint in his eyes. Some of the team members say you've been acting strangely, he said, his voice laced with accusation. Anything I should know about? Just focused on wrapping everything up, I replied, a calm smile on my face. He studied me, clearly unconvinced. We're changing all system passwords and access credentials tomorrow, after your departure. Standard procedure. Makes sense, I said, though I knew it wouldn't affect the core functionality of System Sync. Meaning, he pressed, his brow furrowed. Just that the system is designed to work regardless of admin changes. That's the beauty of it. I could see him trying to decide if I was threatening something or just being informative. He chose wrong. I think we're good here, he dismissed me, a faint air of victory in his tone. Legal will meet with you tomorrow for final paperwork. As I walked out, Massimo passed me in the hallway, barely offering a nod. 17 years, reduced to that. By midnight, everything was in place. I sent one final email to my private server. Verification sequence Alpha 7 complete. The countdown had begun. Friday morning, I turned in my badge, signed the exit paperwork, and politely declined the celebration lunch Alessio had organized, much to Massimo's visible relief. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. Luca. It's done, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Alessio just changed all the admin passwords. They're doing a full system review this afternoon. Thanks for letting me know, I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," I replied, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across my face, "we wait." I spent the weekend at home, ignoring calls from unknown numbers, sleeping better than I had in months. Monday morning at 9:17 a.m., precisely when the production floor shifted to peak operation, every instance of system sync across Vesuvio's 3 facilities displayed the same message: license expired. Please contact the developer to renew. By 9:20, the first production line halted. By 9:45, all 3 facilities were offline. At 10:30, Massimo called me personally. "What the hell did you do, Marco?" He was trying to sound authoritative, but I could hear the sheer panic in his voice. "I didn't do anything," I replied calmly, my voice even, unhurried. "The software license expired. As the developer and owner of System Sync, I'm happy to discuss renewal terms." "This is sabotage," he hissed, his voice rising. "It's standard license management," I corrected him, my tone clinical. "Check the original integration agreement from 17 years ago. Clause 7 specifically states that Vesuvio was licensing the technology, not purchasing it." Silence on the line. "I've sent a proper licensing agreement to your legal department," I continued, pressing my advantage. "The terms are simple: recognition of my ownership, proper compensation for continued use, and a non-disclosure agreement about the circumstances of my departure." "That's extortion," he spluttered. "That's business." "Massimo," I replied, a trace of steel in my voice, "these things happen." By 3 p.m., their lawyers had reviewed my meticulously prepared documentation. By 5 p.m., the agreement was signed. 3 days later, I sat across from Astra's vice president of operations in their sprawling downtown office. He slid a contract across the polished table. "We're still acquiring Vesuvio," he said, his gaze direct and appraising. "But we want you to lead the technical integration. As a consultant, not an employee." The salary was twice what Vesuvio had paid me, with full control over my working hours and location. "What about Alessio?" I asked, a hint of curiosity in my voice. The VP's expression soured slightly. "Mr. Bianchi will be transitioning to other opportunities." I signed the contract that afternoon. 2 weeks later, Luca called to tell me Alessio had been quietly removed from his position. The official story was that he'd pursued other opportunities. The actual reason was that 3 major clients had threatened to pull their contracts after repeated system failures. Massimo remained CEO through the acquisition, but his role at Astra was largely ceremonial. No real power, no real team, just a fancy title and an office far from the actual decision-makers. I didn't feel the rush of vindication I expected, just a quiet certainty that I'd done what was necessary. The following month, I used my first consulting check to put a down payment on a small cabin near the lake. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place with a deck overlooking the water, somewhere I could watch the sun set and rise again. Sophia joined my consulting team 3 months later, then Luca. Eventually, half my old department was working with me, not for me partners in a growing business. I ran into Massimo at a restaurant downtown about a year after everything happened. He started to turn away, then stopped, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, and came over to my table. "You won?" he said simply, his voice flat. I looked at him, really looked. The strain around his eyes, the slightly rumpled suit he'd aged. "It wasn't about winning," I replied, meaning it. "It was about value, knowing what you're worth." He nodded once, then walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I sat there a long time, watching the city lights come on across the river, thinking about systems. The ones we build, the ones we break, and the ones that ultimately outlast us all.